It was the kind of moment that would be replayed for weeks, on social media, in living rooms, at family dinners, and for the people involved, it would feel like a lifetime. But in that very instant, it was just raw, unfiltered reality. Karoline Leavitt, a young and fiercely passionate political figure, had never imagined her name would be linked to an iconic television personality like Whoopi Goldberg in such a dramatic fashion. Yet here she was, standing in front of a live studio audience, every inch of her composed, except for one small but unmistakable fire burning behind her eyes. The air was thick with tension. The stage lights shone down on her, casting long shadows on the sleek modern set of The View, where the unexpected had begun to unfold. Whoopi, the renowned co-host, had just lobbed a question at Karoline, one she thought was fair, grounded in skepticism, and a little pointed. But in the instant she asked, she made a miscalculation. Karoline was not the usual political guest who would bite their tongue and roll with the punches. No, Karoline had her own story to tell, and she wasn't about to let someone, especially Whoopi, rewrite it for her. "You really believe that?" Whoopi had asked, her voice cool, but with a trace of incredulity. And Karoline, without missing a beat, responded, "I believe in standing up for what's right, even if it makes people uncomfortable." The studio audience held their collective breath. It wasn't just the sharpness of her words, it was the defiance in her stance. She wasn't backing down, not now, not in front of millions. But what had brought Karoline to this moment? What had led to this very public clash between two powerful women, each standing firm in their respective corners? The clock was ticking, down to the point of no return, and what started as a regular interview on a popular talk show was about to turn into something far more electric. But this wasn't just about a TV spat. It was about the fight for truth, power, and the battle to maintain one's voice in a world that often felt like it wanted to shout you down. As the audience waited for what would come next, the question lingered. How far would Karoline push back? Would she let this moment slip into history as another quiet capitulation? Or would she show the world her fire? In the seconds that followed, Karoline locked eyes with Whoopi. The challenge was laid bare, and the rest, as they say, would be history. Karoline had never been one to shy away from a challenge. In fact, she'd built her career on standing up to the establishment, on questioning norms and calling out what she saw as hypocrisy. But even for someone as driven as she was, the events leading up to that moment on The View had been unexpected. It all started weeks earlier, when Karoline had been invited onto the show to discuss the latest developments in her political campaign. A rising star in her party, Karoline had quickly made a name for herself with sharp speeches, bold positions, and a no-nonsense attitude. She was passionate, quick-witted, and willing to stand toe-to-toe with anyone, particularly with the liberal media, who often targeted her with hard questions. But despite the sparring, she felt this would be her chance to show her followers, and the world, that she wasn't intimidated by the big names in the media. What she hadn't anticipated, though, was how personal things would get. The View 2 was notorious for its heated discussions. But this time, something was different. Whoopi, sitting across from her with that trademark composed stare, had asked a question that seemed almost too perfect, too carefully calculated. "Karoline, you talk about championing values," Whoopi had begun, her voice dripping with a mix of concern and skepticism. "But let's be real. How do you reconcile your politics with what's happening to people right now? With all that's going on, do you think your policies are the solution or just more of the same?" It was the tone, the subtle accusation, the unspoken suggestion that Karoline wasn't equipped to handle the very issues she claimed to care about. For a moment, Karoline's heart sank. She could see it in the faces of the audience, eyes wide, leaning forward, eager for a reaction. The studio lights felt blinding, and every breath seemed too loud. Karoline's older brother, Michael, who had been with her on the campaign trail for years, watched from the wings. He knew this moment would be pivotal. They had prepared for interviews like this. They had rehearsed, gone over every word and response. But even Michael, who had seen his sister face down politicians, journalists, and critics without batting an eye, could feel the weight of this one. The question wasn't just about politics. It was about who Karoline was at her core, and Whoopi knew it, and so did Karoline. A wave of frustration rippled through her chest. There was a delicate dance at play here, one that would either expose her as a fraud or cement her as the fighter she had always been. Her reply came before she even fully understood the force behind it. "I'm not in this for the easy answers. I'm here because we need change, real change, and it's uncomfortable. But if that makes you or anyone else uncomfortable, then I'm doing something right." The audience seemed to inhale collectively. But Karoline didn't stop there. This wasn't just a TV moment. This was a battle for her truth. Michael, standing just behind the stage curtain, couldn't help but feel a knot in his stomach. He knew his sister wasn't the type to back down, but this was different. It wasn't just about politics. It was about her identity, her mission, and maybe her future. Whoopi leaned in, her expression hardening. The challenge had been accepted. The first clash was over, but the real battle was just beginning. In the days following that charged moment on The View, Karoline could feel the heat intensify. What had started as a routine appearance on a popular talk show had quickly turned into a full-scale media frenzy. Headlines screamed about the exchange, some calling it an epic clash, others framing it as the young politician finally meeting her match. For every person who applauded her boldness, there were just as many who criticized her for her perceived arrogance. Karoline couldn't escape the buzz even when she tried. Every time she opened her phone, the notifications were relentless. Twitter debates, angry comments from political opponents, think pieces dissecting her every word. Her campaign team, usually supportive, was now tense. They knew the importance of her public image. After all, perception could make or break a candidate. They had spent countless hours strategizing her public appearances, yet now it felt as if the very message they'd crafted together was being hijacked. It wasn't just the backlash that unnerved her. It was the nagging question she couldn't shake. Did I say the right thing? That night, alone in her hotel room, Karoline ran a hand through her hair, her thoughts swirling like a storm. She had always prided herself on her conviction, but had she pushed too far this time? Her response, to Whoopi, sharp, confident, but undeniably defiant, had been a calculated move in the moment. But was it what people needed to hear? Or was it the defense of someone feeling cornered? She replayed the encounter over and over, each time growing more exhausted by the constant cycle of self-analysis. The setback wasn't just about the interview, it was about the world watching her, waiting for her to falter. And with every new headline, Karoline could feel the weight of expectations pressing down on her. Michael tried to console her, but even he could sense her unease. He wasn't the type to sugarcoat things, but his protective instincts were in overdrive. "Karoline," he said one night, after an awkward silence hung in the air. "You've built your whole career on authenticity. You can't start second-guessing yourself now." But it was hard. Her family, her parents, her loyal supporters reminded her that they believed in her. Yet the critics were loud, and she could feel their eyes on her, scrutinizing every word she spoke. Her campaign staff was divided. Some believed the controversy could be spun into a strength, a boldness that would rally the base. Others worried it might alienate key voters. In those moments of tension, Karoline began to feel isolated, as if everyone had an opinion on who she should be, except for her. The doubt crept in, threatening to overshadow the very fire that had gotten her here in the first place. Could she still be the leader she wanted to be, or was she becoming someone else in the process? The battle for her soul and her future had only just begun. The tipping point came unexpectedly, just when Karoline thought she could no longer keep up with the whirlwind of criticism. It was a quiet afternoon, and she was alone in her campaign office, staring at the barrage of media coverage that had flooded in since her View appearance. Her fingers hovered over her phone screen, but she couldn't bring herself to scroll. The noise was deafening, and every notification seemed to chip away at her resolve. But then, in the midst of the chaos, she saw something that cut through the static. A message from her late mentor, Senator Emily Grant. Karoline had worked closely with Senator Grant before stepping into the spotlight on her own. Grant had been a guiding force in her life, a strong, no-nonsense woman who had faced her own share of media storms during her tenure in office. The message was short, but its impact was immediate. "Karoline, you know what to do. Don't lose sight of the bigger picture. It's not about them. It's about what you stand for. Stick to your truth." It was as if the fog in her mind had cleared. Karoline's heart raced as the words settled deep within her. Senator Grant had never been one for fluff. But this message, simple yet profound, reminded Karoline of everything she had believed in when she first entered the political arena. This wasn't about playing the game the way others wanted her to. It wasn't about caving to the media or trying to appease anyone. It was about staying true to the very ideals that had driven her from the beginning, the ones that had sparked her to stand in the first place, on that stage, in front of millions of viewers, challenging Whoopi Goldberg and the entire system. With newfound clarity, Karoline stood up, a sense of purpose flooding through her veins. The stakes had been raised. She realized that the personal attacks, the doubts, and the criticisms were part of the territory. They weren't the enemy. They were distractions. The real fight was about what she wanted her legacy to be, about what kind of leader she would become. It was time to embrace the role of the underdog. Not as a disadvantage, but as a powerful position. She had always fought harder than anyone else because she had to. Now, it was time to lean into that tenacity. From that moment on, Karoline knew what she had to do. She was no longer just defending herself. She was defending her truth. And if that made the world uncomfortable, so be it. The fight for authenticity had just begun. The next day, Karoline walked into the studio with a new sense of purpose. The weight of the past few days, the headlines, the endless debates, had all built to this moment. She had prepared herself for the inevitable follow-up appearance on The View, the one that everyone was waiting for, the one that would either redeem her or cement the growing rift between her and her critics. But this time, she wasn't nervous. Not a single ounce of doubt lingered. The time for second-guessing was over. As she entered the stage, the audience was already buzzing with anticipation, the energy palpable. Whoopi sat at her usual spot, her face unreadable, as if she had steeled herself for whatever was about to unfold. Karoline's team was backstage, just out of view, but she could feel their nervous excitement through the walls. Michael was there too, offering his silent support, a comforting presence that reminded her why she was fighting in the first place. The host's voice cut through the tension. "We're back with Karoline Leavitt, the young politician whose recent appearance sparked quite the debate," Whoopi began, her tone cool but still carrying the faintest trace of challenge. "Let's talk about that moment, Karoline. You didn't just disagree with me, you made a stand. And now you've got the whole country talking. How do you feel about the fallout?" The room seemed to close in on Karoline, the spotlight suddenly feeling unbearably hot. She had anticipated this moment, but it still sent a sharp chill down her spine. This wasn't just a conversation. It was a battle. But instead of shrinking back, she leaned forward, locking eyes with Whoopi. "You're right," Karoline said, her voice calm but carrying an undeniable force. "It's uncomfortable to face this kind of scrutiny, but the real question here isn't about me. It's about the people who feel forgotten, the ones who need their voices heard, their concerns addressed. I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to make a difference." Whoopi raised an eyebrow, clearly, taken aback by the unflinching confidence in Karoline's response. "So you think this is bigger than the controversy?" Karoline nodded, her posture straight and unwavering. "Absolutely. This is about more than a political battle. It's about standing up when no one else will. It's about fighting for what's right, even when it's unpopular." There was a beat of silence. Karoline could feel the gaze of the entire audience on her, waiting for the next move. But it wasn't just about winning this moment. It was about staying true to the message she had carried with her all this time. The stakes weren't just personal. They were the future of her campaign, the integrity of her vision, and the fight for every voter who had ever felt overlooked. The conversation shifted then, from the heated exchange to something deeper. Whoopi, who had initially come into the conversation prepared to challenge, seemed to soften, if only slightly. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," she admitted, "but the road ahead won't be easy." "I know," Karoline replied, her voice steady, "but I'm not backing down. I never have." For the first time since the interview had started, Karoline felt like she wasn't just participating in the conversation, she was shaping it. Her words had power now, not because she was trying to convince anyone, but because she had found her own truth. And that truth, raw, real, and unapologetic, was all she needed. The cameras flashed. The audience, once uncertain, erupted into applause. The fight had come full circle. And this time, Karoline wasn't just surviving the battle, she was winning it. The days that followed Karoline's appearance on The View were unlike any she had experienced before. The storm of media attention she had feared was now a force she had learned to navigate. The headlines no longer dominated her thoughts, nor did the constant criticisms that had once eaten away at her confidence. Instead, Karoline felt a new kind of strength rising within her, a quiet assurance that had taken root deep inside. In the wake of her dramatic confrontation with Whoopi Goldberg, Karoline's campaign had taken on a new energy. The controversy had not been the setback that many had predicted. If anything, it had propelled her forward. Donations surged. Voter engagement spiked. People, both allies and opponents, had finally seen who she really was. She wasn't just a candidate trying to win an election. She was a fighter, willing to stand her ground for what she believed in, no matter the cost. Her conversations with supporters changed, too. At campaign rallies, Karoline no longer felt like she was performing or trying to fit into a mold of what others expected her to be. She was speaking from the heart, sharing her vision without fear of judgment. Her team, once cautious, now followed her lead with a renewed sense of purpose. The internal divisions that had threatened to tear them apart seemed to dissolve. They were all in this together, unified by a shared commitment to an idea bigger than any of them. Michael, ever the steadying influence, watched his sister with admiration. He had seen her rise to the occasion before, but this time there was something different in her. She wasn't just taking on her critics, she was redefining what it meant to lead. The early doubts he had about her ability to weather the storm now seemed irrelevant. Karoline wasn't just surviving the fire, she was using it to forge something new. And then, there were the subtle, quiet moments that spoke volumes. Late one night, after a rally in a small town, Karoline and Michael sat on the porch of their rented house, watching the stars. Karoline, looking tired but content, finally broke the silence. "I almost lost myself there," she admitted, her voice softer than usual. "I was so focused on what everyone thought of me, on the expectations. But now I remember why I'm doing this. It's not for them. It's for the people who don't have a voice." Michael gave her a small, knowing smile. "You're not just their voice, Karoline. You're their hope." She nodded, staring out into the night, her mind racing with possibilities. The road ahead was still uncertain. The battles were far from over. But for the first time in a long while, Karoline felt a deep sense of clarity. She was where she needed to be. She was exactly who she needed to be. Her fight wasn't just about politics. It was about living in truth, standing tall in the face of adversity, and forging a path that was uniquely her own. As the stars flickered above, Karoline knew one thing. For certain, the world would remember her not for the challenges she faced, but for how she had faced them, undaunted, unapologetically, and with a heart full of conviction. And in that moment, she was at peace with the journey that lay ahead, because she had finally realized the fight was hers to win.